What if you could win a war without firing a single bullet? What if the most powerful weapon was not a gun or a bomb, but a lie? In 1944, the United States military built a fake army, fake tanks, fake trucks, fake radio signals, and they used it to fool the Nazi army of Adolf Hitler, and it worked every single time. This is not fiction, this happened. And for 50 years, nobody knew about it. The men who did it were ordered to stay completely silent. The secret was locked inside classified government files for half a century. Here is the most surprising part. The men behind this fake army were not tough fighters. Many of them were artists, painters, actors, sound engineers. Creative people you would expect to find in an art school, not on a battlefield in the deadliest war in history. So how did a small group of creative young men fool the entire Nazi war machine? How did rubber and air and radio waves save thousands of lives? Stay with me. By the end of this video, you will never think about war, deception, or the human mind the same way again. You will learn how the brain can be tricked into believing something completely false. You will see how imagination can be deadlier than any weapon. And you will not want to miss what these men pulled off on the banks of the Rhine River. It was the boldest act of deception in World War II history, and it changed everything. Let us begin. It is 1944. The world is on fire. World War II has been raging for 5 brutal years. Millions are dead, cities are ash, families are broken, and the end is nowhere in sight. The Allied forces, America, Britain, Canada, are fighting to stop Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. In June 1944, they make their biggest move, D-Day. Thousands of soldiers storm the beaches of Normandy, France. It is bloody, it is brutal, but it works. The Allies get a foothold in Europe. Now they have to push forward. They have to drive the Nazis back. They have to end this war, but the Nazi army is not giving up. They are well trained, well armed, and every mile the Allies move forward costs lives. Commanders on both sides are making life and death decisions every single day. The Allied generals face a hard reality. They do not have enough troops to be everywhere. Their forces are spread thin across hundreds of miles of front line. If the Nazis find a weak spot, they will attack it, and that could change the entire war. So the Allied commanders ask a bold question. What if we could make the enemy think we are stronger than we really are? What if we could trick them into seeing soldiers and tanks where there are almost none? Deception in war was not a new idea. Ancient generals used fake signals to confuse enemies. In World War I, armies used dummy soldiers and fake equipment. The British had already run clever tricks against the Nazis early in the war. But what the Allies were planning in 1944 was on a completely different level. They were going to build an entire fake army from scratch, a ghost army. A unit that would travel across Europe and make the Nazis believe they were facing a massive, powerful force, when in reality there were only 1,100 men. 1,100 men pretending to be 40,000. The Nazis believed it. Over and over again, they believed it. But to understand how, you first need to understand the men chosen for this mission. Because they were unlike any soldiers the United States Army had ever recruited before. Imagine you are a general in the United States Army in 1944. You need to build a secret unit. A unit whose entire job is to pretend, to fake, to deceive. Who do you hire? Most people would say fighters, men who shoot straight and follow orders. But the men who built the Ghost Army thought completely differently. They did not want fighters, they wanted creators, people who could think fast, improvise, and build something out of nothing. So they went looking in the most unexpected places. Art schools, theater departments, advertising agencies, film studios. They wanted people with sharp minds and creative eyes. People who could look at a problem and find a solution nobody else could see, and they found them. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops was officially activated on January 20, 1944, at Camp Forrest in Tennessee. From the outside, it looked like a normal military unit. But behind closed doors, it was something extraordinary. Among its soldiers was Ellsworth Kelly, who became one of America's most famous artists, Arthur Singer, a brilliant wildlife illustrator, Bill Blass, who became one of the world's top fashion designers. These were gifted, curious, creative people who happened to find themselves in the middle of a world war. The Army wanted exactly that. Because this mission required something no physical strength could provide, it required the ability to build a believable illusion. The unit had 4 groups, each with a very specific job. The first group handled visual deception. These were the artists. They built and operated inflatable tanks, trucks, artillery, and aircraft. When deflated, a full tank could be carried by a few men. When inflated, it looked exactly like a real Sherman tank from the air and from the ground, but they did not just drop them randomly. They studied how real tank units set up in the field. They created real track marks in the mud first. Every detail mattered. The second group handled sonic deception. They used massive speakers mounted on vehicles to broadcast battlefield sounds up to 15 miles away. Tank engines, truck convoys, soldiers shouting. The recordings were so realistic that enemy scouts genuinely believed a large force was moving in the area. The third group handled radio deception. In World War II, radio was everything. Enemy units monitored all transmissions constantly. The Ghost Army's radio operators studied and copied the exact sending style of real operators, the rhythm, speed, and spacing of their Morse code. It was like forging a signature in sound. The fourth group handled human deception. These soldiers went into towns and bars wearing the patches of other, larger American units. They dropped false hints in conversations. They planted clues everywhere with the confidence of trained actors, because many of them were. Together, these four groups created one complete illusion. An army that existed only in the enemy's mind. By spring 1944, they were ready. 1,100 men armed not with firepower but with imagination. Their mission sounded almost laughable. Go to the front lines, pretend to be an army you are not, and make the Nazis look the wrong way. It was insane, it was dangerous, and it worked. Before we talk about what the Ghost Army did, we need to understand why it worked. The Nazi military was not stupid. They had trained commanders, intelligence units, aerial reconnaissance, and sophisticated radio monitoring. They were professionals. They were not easy to fool. So how did artists with rubber tanks and loudspeakers trick them over and over again? The answer is inside the human brain. The brain is an incredible machine. It processes millions of pieces of information every second, but it has one powerful weakness. It hates uncertainty. When it faces incomplete information, it does not wait for more. It fills in the gaps. It takes what it already knows and makes its best guess about what is really there. In normal life, this is useful. It helps you recognize faces. It helps you read words with missing letters. But in war, this same feature becomes a dangerous vulnerability. When a Nazi commander received a report of radio traffic from a certain location, his brain immediately started building a picture. Radio traffic means soldiers. Soldiers mean equipment. Equipment means a unit, and once that picture started forming, something powerful happened. He started looking for evidence that confirmed it, and he started ignoring anything that contradicted it. Psychologists call this confirmation bias. Once we believe something, we search for information that supports it. We unconsciously dismiss what challenges it. This happens to everyone, doctors, scientists, generals, you, me, every human being on the planet. The Ghost Army understood this intuitively. They knew they did not need a perfect illusion. They just needed to be good enough to plant the first seed of belief. After that, the enemy's own brain would do the rest. The sounds of tanks, confirmation. Radio traffic, confirmation. Reports from local informants, confirmation. The picture in the enemy's mind grew stronger, built entirely on illusion. There is a second principle at work here, called the principle of least effort. Under stress, people naturally choose the simplest explanation that fits the available evidence. Battlefield commanders do not have time to question everything. They need fast, clear answers. The Ghost Army gave them exactly that: simple, obvious, believable pictures of a large American force. And the enemy's stressed brain grabbed those pictures and held on tight. There is a third principle, perhaps the most powerful of all. People see what they expect to see. If a Nazi intelligence officer was already expecting American forces to build up in a certain area, his brain was primed to see that buildup. When the Ghost Army appeared there with the right signals, right sounds, and right radio traffic, it matched his expectations perfectly. His brain said, "Yes, exactly what I predicted." That feeling of matching expectations felt like proof of reality, but it was proof of a carefully built lie. The Ghost Army hacked the enemy's expectations. They studied where and when the Nazis expected American forces to appear. Then they appeared there at exactly the right time, with exactly the right signals. The enemy's brain connected the dots automatically, but the Ghost Army went even deeper. They also exploited the enemy's strengths. German intelligence officers were known for being rigorous and systematic. They cross-referenced sources. They built careful pictures from multiple data points. And that made them especially vulnerable to a multi-layered deception. Because the more systematic your analysis, the more you trust your conclusions when all your sources agree. All of the Ghost Army's deception streams looked like separate, independent sources: visual, sonic, radio, human, but they all came from the same unit. They were all parts of the same lie. The enemy thought he had confirmed the same truth through 4 independent channels. In reality, he had confirmed the same lie through 4 coordinated channels. Finally, stress made everything worse for the enemy. Stress narrows the brain's focus. It kills the ability to spot subtle inconsistencies. It makes the brain desperate for clear, simple answers. By 1944 and 1945, German commanders were exhausted, retreating, and under enormous pressure from Hitler. Their critical thinking was severely degraded. The Ghost Army was performing their illusions for an audience that could barely see clearly. They did not just trick the enemy. They trapped them in a psychological prison that was almost impossible to escape. Picture a tank. It weighs 30 tons. The ground shakes when it moves. The engine roars. The metal tracks grind into the earth. It is one of the most intimidating machines ever built. Now imagine building one out of rubber and air. That is exactly what the Ghost Army did. And they did it so convincingly that trained military pilots, experienced intelligence officers, and enemy commanders were completely fooled. The inflatable tanks were engineering marvels. Made from heavy rubber and canvas, a deflated tank could be folded and carried by just a few men. When inflated, it stood full size, with the exact shape, proportions, and silhouette of a real Sherman tank. From the air or from a distance on the ground, it was indistinguishable from the real thing. But the Ghost Army did not just drop rubber tanks in a field. Real military units follow specific patterns. They position equipment in tactically logical ways. They leave track marks in the mud. A trained observer knows exactly what a real tank unit looks like. Any mistake would collapse the deception instantly. So the Ghost Army studied real armored units obsessively. They learned correct vehicle spacing. They learned how tracks should look in different ground conditions. They even drove real vehicles through the area first to create genuine track marks before positioning the inflatables along them. The attention to detail was extraordinary. But visual deception alone was not enough. A silent, motionless collection of rubber tanks would quickly raise suspicion. Real military equipment is always generating noise and activity. That is where the sonic deception unit came in. They used powerful speakers mounted on vehicles to project battlefield sounds up to 15 miles away. The recordings were not simple. They were crafted at a dedicated Army sound studio and captured everything authentically. Tank engines starting up, metal tracks grinding on rough ground, truck convoys, soldiers shouting orders. Bridge building equipment. Months of work went into making every sound perfect. At night, the sonic unit would move quietly into position. Then they would switch on the speakers and fill the darkness with the sounds of a massive army on the move. Enemy scouts would hear the noise and immediately radio their commanders. Large American force moving in Sector 4, and the commanders believed them completely. But radio intelligence was the most critical layer of all. Radio was the nervous system of World War II. Every unit sent dozens of messages daily. Enemy intelligence monitored all of it constantly. They tracked signal locations, analyzed patterns, and built detailed pictures of enemy forces just by listening. A spike in radio traffic from a certain area meant something significant was happening there. The Ghost Army's radio operators did not just broadcast fake messages. They created complete fake radio identities. Every real operator had a unique style of sending Morse code, a personal rhythm as distinctive as a fingerprint. Ghost Army operators spent weeks studying and copying these individual styles so precisely that enemy analysts could not detect the difference. They also replicated every pattern of real radio discipline: call signs used at the right times, radio silence observed at the right moments, traffic volume that matched a large unit preparing for action. To any enemy analyst, the radio picture looked completely authentic, and then came the human layer. The most personal and most dangerous part. Ghost Army soldiers went into local towns wearing patches and insignia of other large American units. They talked in bars, they chatted with locals. They casually dropped hints about troop movements and unit activity. The information always found its way to enemy intelligence through informants and spies. They matched every small detail. If a real unit had a known behavioral pattern, they replicated it in public. If a commander was known for driving a specific vehicle, that vehicle appeared in the area. Because in military intelligence, small details build the big picture. All four layers working together created something remarkable. A complete, convincing fake army that existed only in the minds of the enemy. Now it was time to take it into the field. Knowing the tools is one thing. Watching them in action is something else entirely. The Ghost Army ran over 20 separate deception operations across Europe between 1944 and 1945. Every operation was different. Everyone came with its own risks and its own moments of breathtaking tension. These men worked right at the edge of the front lines. Sometimes enemy soldiers were close enough to hear them talking. Every operation was a live performance, and the penalty for a bad performance was not a bad review, it was death. Their first major test came in the summer of 1944, shortly after D-Day. Allied forces had broken out of Normandy and were pushing fast across France. But that speed created dangerous gaps in the line, stretches where there were almost no Allied forces at all. If the Germans found those gaps and pushed through, they could split the entire Allied advance. The Ghost Army was sent to fill those gaps, not with real soldiers, with the illusion of soldiers. They set up inflatable tanks and equipment. They broadcast sonic recordings into the night. Their radio operators filled the airwaves with fake traffic. Their human teams went into nearby towns wearing patches of large, powerful American units. It worked. German commanders saw what looked like a strong American presence in those areas. They hesitated. They did not push through. Real American forces caught up and filled the line behind the Ghost Army's illusion. First test passed. As the Allied advance continued through France, the Ghost Army ran operation after operation. The mission was always essentially the same: appear somewhere you are desperately needed, look like something much bigger than you are, and hold the illusion long enough for real forces to move. But not every night went smoothly. There were moments of genuine terror. Enemy artillery shells landed close to their positions. Enemy patrols came uncomfortably near. There was always the fear that someone would look too closely at one of the inflatables and notice it was made of rubber, or that an enemy radio analyst would catch an inconsistency, or that a local informant would expose them. The psychological pressure was enormous. They were 1,100 lightly armed men pretending to be 40,000. If the enemy ever discovered the truth and attacked in force, the Ghost Army would have been destroyed in minutes. They lived with that fear every single day. One of the most important early operations took place in Luxembourg in the fall of 1944. The Ghost Army had to simulate an entire American armored division in an area where the real division had secretly moved away. The Nazis had to keep believing that division was still there. If they discovered it had moved, they would immediately know something big was being planned elsewhere, and that could blow the entire Allied strategy open. The Ghost Army moved in at night. Inflatables went up, sonic equipment fired up, radio operators began broadcasting, human teams worked the local villages. For days the deception held perfectly. German intelligence kept reporting the presence of the American division. Their commanders made decisions based on that false information. Meanwhile, the real division was exactly where Allied commanders needed it, ready to strike at a completely different point in the line. But their greatest and most important operation was still ahead. It was spring 1945. The war was entering its final, desperate phase. The Allies were preparing to cross the Rhine River, one of the most strategically critical operations of the entire war. The Rhine was the last major natural barrier between the Allied forces and the heart of Germany. If they crossed successfully, the war would be effectively over. If the Germans concentrated their defenses at the right crossing point, the casualties could be catastrophic. The Ghost Army was given a mission of breathtaking boldness. They had to simulate an entire river crossing operation at a fake location on the Rhine. They had to convince the Germans that two full American divisions, roughly 30,000 men, were preparing to cross the river at their location. They had 1,100 men to do it. They worked without stopping. Hundreds of inflatable vehicles lined the riverbank. Sonic units broadcast the sounds of massive military preparations: trucks, tanks, bridging equipment, thousands of troops. Radio operators flooded the airwaves with traffic suggesting a huge force was building. Human teams went into every town in the area, talking, hinting, playing their parts without a single mistake. The Germans believed it completely. They shifted forces toward the Ghost Army's fake crossing point. They concentrated their defenses exactly where the Ghost Army wanted them, away from where the real crossing was planned. On the night of March 23, 1945, the real American forces crossed the Rhine at their actual crossing point. They met far lighter resistance than anyone had dared hope for. The crossing succeeded with far fewer casualties than military planners had feared possible. Thousands of American soldiers walked across that river and into Germany because the enemy was looking entirely the wrong way. The Ghost Army's greatest performance was complete. They packed up their rubber tanks quietly in the darkness and drove away. No celebration, no recognition, strict orders of absolute secrecy. Just a small group of artists and engineers in uniform, carrying the weight of what they had accomplished entirely alone. It would be 50 years before the world found out what happened on that riverbank. Let us talk about numbers, because numbers tell the real story. Military historians estimate that Ghost Army operations directly saved between 15,000 and 30,000 American lives. Think about that. 15,000 to 30,000 young men who went home, who got married, who had children, who lived full lives. All because 1,100 artists and engineers made the enemy look the wrong way at exactly the right moment. That is not a small number. That is entire towns of people who exist today because of what the Ghost Army did, but the impact goes far beyond casualties. To truly understand what they achieved, you have to look at the strategic picture. In war, the difference between success and failure is rarely about army size. It is almost always about information. About what the enemy knows, about where they are looking. The Ghost Army gave Allied commanders something extraordinarily valuable: control over what the enemy believed. And in warfare, controlling what the enemy believes is more powerful than controlling the ground beneath your feet. Look at the Rhine crossing one more time. The Allied commanders knew exactly where they wanted to cross, but if the Germans concentrated their forces there, it would be a bloodbath. They needed the Germans looking elsewhere. The Ghost Army made that happen. Military analysts believe that without their deception, the Rhine crossing could have cost tens of thousands of additional casualties. It could have delayed the end of the war by months, and every additional month of World War II meant hundreds of thousands more deaths on all sides. The Ghost Army did not just save American lives. They potentially shortened the war itself. Before the Ghost Army, military deception was seen as a secondary tool, something useful occasionally. The Ghost Army changed that thinking permanently. They proved that deception could be a primary strategic weapon, that a small, creative unit could achieve results requiring tens of thousands of conventional troops. That the most efficient way to win a battle was sometimes not to fight it at all, but to make the enemy fight a battle that did not exist. This revolutionary idea was proven true not once or twice, but more than 20 times across France, Luxembourg, Belgium, and Germany. Allied commanders who worked with the Ghost Army came away deeply impressed. General Omar Bradley understood exactly what they provided: flexibility. The ability to move real units where they were truly needed, knowing the Ghost Army could cover the gaps. The ability to keep the enemy constantly uncertain. Uncertainty is a weapon. When an enemy commander does not know where you are or what you are doing, he cannot commit his forces confidently. He must hold reserves back. He must spread his troops thin to cover multiple possible threats. A commander who cannot concentrate his strength is already at a disadvantage. The Ghost Army created uncertainty on an industrial scale. Every operation forced German commanders to second-guess their intelligence, to hesitate at moments when hesitation was fatal. That hesitation cost the German military time, momentum, and ultimately contributed to their defeat. There is another impact rarely discussed. Every time a German commander made a decision based on Ghost Army deception and got it wrong, his confidence eroded. His superiors lost trust in his intelligence reports. The entire German intelligence apparatus started looking unreliable. An army that cannot trust its own intelligence slowly loses its grip on reality. By the final months of the war, German commanders were operating in a deep fog of confusion. They had been deceived so many times they struggled to know what to believe. That psychological erosion degraded German decision-making at the most critical possible moment. and the Ghost Army's legacy extended far beyond the war itself. Their success changed how the United States military thought about unconventional operations forever. The idea that a small creative unit could achieve strategic results far beyond its size became a foundation of modern special operations thinking. But behind all the strategy and all the numbers were real human beings, scared men, 1,100 lightly armed soldiers pretending to be 40,000, working within range of enemy artillery. Sometimes within sight of enemy soldiers, living every day with the fear that today might be the day the illusion collapsed, and yet they kept going, operation after operation. Setting up rubber tanks in the darkness, broadcasting sounds into the night, tapping fake Morse code, walking into bars and playing their roles perfectly. Because they knew real lives depended on what they were doing, that is not just strategic impact, that is heroism of the quietest and most remarkable kind. We touched on psychology earlier. Now let us go deeper. The Ghost Army's success was not luck. It was the result of a deep, intuitive understanding of how the human mind works under pressure. And that understanding matters just as much today as it did in 1944. Start with something fundamental. The human brain did not evolve to be accurate, it evolved to survive. For most of human history, survival meant making fast decisions with incomplete information. The brain that waited for perfect data before acting was the brain that got eaten. The brain that made fast, good enough decisions was the brain that lived. This left us with a brain that is fast, efficient, and deeply overconfident. We make decisions from fragments of information. We fill in missing pieces with assumptions, and we feel completely certain about conclusions built largely on guesswork. The Ghost Army knew this in practice. They knew they did not need a perfect illusion. They just needed enough of one to trigger the enemy's brain into completing the picture on its own, like a connect-the-dots puzzle. Place enough dots in the right positions and the brain automatically connects them and sees the image. Once it sees that image, it is extremely difficult to unsee. This is why the multi-layered approach was so powerful. One layer alone might create doubt. But when visual intelligence, sonic reports, radio traffic, and human informant reports all pointed to the same conclusion simultaneously, the brain felt the weight of that agreement. Doubt disappeared, certainty took over. Psychologists call this corroboration bias. When multiple sources confirm the same thing, we trust it far more than if only one source confirmed it. What the enemy did not realize was that all those separate streams of intelligence shared one common false root. They all came from the same 1,100 men. They were all the same lie wearing different costumes. The Ghost Army also turned the enemy's professionalism against them. German intelligence officers were highly trained, systematic, and thorough. They cross-referenced sources carefully. They followed rigorous analytical procedures, and that made them especially vulnerable. Because the more systematic your analysis, the more confidence you place in conclusions that emerge from it. When a disciplined analyst follows every correct procedure and all sources agree, he commits to the conclusion with complete confidence. He has done everything right, he trusts his result completely. That confidence was exactly what the Ghost Army needed. A doubtful commander hedges, a confident commander commits, and a committed commander moves his forces exactly where the Ghost Army wanted them. Then there was stress. Stress destroys the brain's ability to spot subtle inconsistencies. Under normal conditions, we notice when something feels slightly wrong. That quiet instinct is one of our most powerful tools, but stress kills it. Under severe stress, the brain narrows its focus, becomes desperate for simple, clear answers, and seizes on the first plausible explanation it finds. German commanders in 1944 and 1945 were running on maximum stress. Army retreating, resources running out, Hitler making irrational demands, life and death decisions every hour. Their ability to spot the subtle wrongness of the Ghost Army's deceptions was severely compromised. The Ghost Army was performing magic tricks for an exhausted, overwhelmed audience that could barely think straight. Finally, there is the sunk cost effect. Once a person commits to a belief, changing their mind means admitting they were wrong. That is psychologically painful. So people resist updating their beliefs, even when new evidence points the other way. Once a German commander committed forces to defending the Ghost Army's fake threat, he became emotionally invested in that threat being real. Admitting he had been fooled was not just embarrassing. Under Hitler, who punished failure ruthlessly, it could be fatal to your career or your life. So commanders kept defending against threats that did not exist. They kept pouring resources into fighting a ghost. The ghost army did not just fool the enemy once, they trapped them in a psychological prison. And those same principles, confirmation bias, corroboration bias, stress, sunk costs, shape decisions made by ordinary people every single day, including yours and mine. The war ended in May 1945. The Ghost Army packed up their rubber tanks for the last time. They folded their inflatables, switched off the sonic equipment, shut down the fake radio networks, took off the patches of units they had been pretending to be, and they went home, but they could not talk about any of it. Before discharge, every member of the Ghost Army received strict, explicit orders. What they had done was classified top secret. They were not to discuss it with anyone, not parents, not siblings, not wives, not closest friends, not anyone, ever. And so they went home carrying an enormous secret, not just an interesting secret. A secret representing the most dramatic, dangerous, and important moments of their entire lives. They had helped change the course of history. They had saved thousands of lives. They had pulled off something extraordinary, and they could not tell a single person. Try to imagine what that felt like. You come home, your family throws a party. Your father asks what you did over there, and you smile and give a vague answer. You watch the conversation move on. You carry your secret in silence. Your wife notices something. She can see the war affected you deeply. She asks you quietly late at night, and you have to look her in the eyes and say nothing, not because you do not trust her, but because your orders were absolute. The years pass, children grow up, they ask what their father did in the war. Other veterans tell their stories, books are written, movies are made. But the men of the Ghost Army stay silent. They go to work, they raise families, and they carry their secret through decades of ordinary life. The silence took a real toll. Other veterans could find community, share their stories, and find some healing through that sharing. Ghost Army veterans largely could not. They were isolated in an experience the world did not even know had happened. The classified status was not lifted until 1996, 51 years after the war ended. By then, many of these men had already died. They went to their graves without public recognition, without ever hearing that what they had done had mattered, that their country was grateful. When the story finally came out, largely through the work of documentary filmmaker Rick Bayer, the reaction was immediate. People were stunned. Military historians were amazed. The general public could barely believe it was real. The surviving veterans, now in their 80s and 90s, finally got to speak. Some wept, not from sadness, from the release of carrying something so heavy for so long, from finally being seen. Many had kept quiet, private records throughout, sketches drawn in the field, carefully worded diaries, photographs taken during operations. These became historical treasures overnight. They gave intimate, vivid glimpses into the fear, creativity, dark humor, and camaraderie of life inside the Ghost Army. Their story is not just about military deception. It is about sacrifice, about the different forms that courage takes, about the price paid not in blood on a battlefield, but in silence across a lifetime. The Ghost Army is gone. The rubber tanks have deflated forever. The sonic equipment has rusted away. The radio operators have gone silent, but their legacy lives on powerfully and permanently. The Ghost Army fundamentally changed how the United States military thinks about warfare. Before them, deception was a secondary tool, something used occasionally for small advantages. After them, deception became a serious, studied strategic discipline built into military planning at the highest levels. The concept of information warfare, using information and perception as primary weapons, owes a direct debt to what the Ghost Army proved possible. Every modern military has units dedicated to psychological operations, electronic warfare, and information deception. All of them trace their foundational ideas back to the rubber tanks and sonic speakers of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. The Ghost Army also shaped modern special operations philosophy. The idea that a small, unconventional, creative unit can achieve strategic results far beyond its size became a cornerstone of how elite units think and operate today. But the legacy reaches far beyond the military. We live in an age where images, sounds, and information can be fabricated instantly and spread to millions within seconds. Where the gap between what is real and what appears real has never been narrower or more dangerous. the Ghost Army used rubber and mechanical speakers to build their illusions. Today, the same illusions are built with artificial intelligence and deepfake technology in minutes, but the psychological principles are identical. Confirmation bias still shapes how people process information. Corroboration bias still makes people overtrust multiple sources sharing a common false root. Stress still degrades critical thinking. The sunk cost effect still traps people in false beliefs they have already committed to. Understanding the Ghost Army is not just interesting history, it is a survival skill for the modern world. The same techniques used on Nazi commanders are being used today on ordinary people through digital media and information campaigns. The battlefield has changed. The weapons have changed. The target has not. It is still the human brain, with all its extraordinary capabilities and all its exploitable weaknesses. In 2022, President Biden signed the Ghost Army Congressional Gold Medal Act. The 23rd Headquarters Special Troops finally received America's highest civilian honor, decades overdue, but no less meaningful. Only a handful of original veterans were still alive to receive it. Fragile in body but sharp in mind, finally seen, finally recognized, they just did it with rubber and sound and radio waves instead of bullets, and the world will never forget. We have come a long way together in this video. We started with one simple question. What if you could win a battle without firing a single bullet? It sounded like a riddle, but it was reality. It happened and it changed history. We learned about young men chosen not for their strength but for their minds. We learned about rubber tanks and sonic speakers and forged radio signatures. We learned about the psychological principles that made it all work, about confirmation bias and corroboration bias and how stress strips away clear thinking. We learned about 23 operations across Europe, the Rhine crossing, and thousands of lives saved. We learned about 50 years of silence. About men who carried an extraordinary secret through entire lifetimes and never received the recognition they deserved. Here's the one thing I want you to take away. The Ghost Army proved that creativity is not a soft skill. It is not a luxury. It is a weapon. In the right hands at the right moment, imagination can achieve what no amount of conventional force ever could. Whatever skills you have that the world does not quite know what to do with yet, the Ghost Army is proof that there is a moment for every kind of mind, and they leave us with a warning. The same psychological tools they used to save lives are being used today to manipulate ordinary people. Understanding how deception works is now a survival skill. 1,100 men. 40,000 fake soldiers, 15,000 to 30,000 lives saved, 50 years of silence. One extraordinary story the world almost never heard. Remember the Ghost Army, because they changed the world with rubber and air and radio waves. And now, let me leave you with one final thought, and that is the story of the Ghost Army. 1,100 men, 40,000 fake soldiers, rubber, air, and radio waves, and a secret kept hidden from the world for 50 years, but today you heard it. And now you know that the most powerful weapon ever built was not made of steel. It was not fired from a gun. It lived inside the human mind. And 1,100 creative, courageous, extraordinary men proved that to the entire world. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it sparked something inside you, please share it with someone, because stories like this deserve to be heard. And the questions they raise deserve to be asked out loud. And if you want more hidden history, psychology, and mind-blowing true stories that most people never get to hear, hit that subscribe button right now. And make sure you tap the bell icon so you never miss a single video. We are building a community of curious minds here, and we would love for you to be part of it. Before you go, drop a comment below and tell us, what surprised you most about the Ghost Army? Was it the rubber tanks, the sonic deception, the radio forgery? Or the 50 years of silence that followed? We read every single comment, and your thoughts genuinely matter to us. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. That means everything. New video is coming very soon, and trust me, you are not going to want to miss it. Until then, stay curious, keep asking questions, and never stop looking deeper. Because the most important things in this world are almost always hidden just beneath the surface. See you in the next one.